Welcome to week 15 of my Unhitched webinar shorts. This is the final short in the series that we have been working on all summer. So this has been a series of short, easily digestible webinars where I've been covering some of the most common questions and issues that I get in my practice. And we're just going to round out the series this week by covering finding love after divorce. It is not a subject that it's not my wheelhouse. This is not how I normally work with people on finding their next one. But it does have a big part in my own personal life and my own personal experience post-divorce, which is why I wanted to share it with you all. So you are in the right place if you are considering divorce, in the midst of it, post-divorce, any of those things, because one of the most common fears that I hear in my practice when people are either considering divorce or they are actually post-divorce is finding love again. And it used to also come up quite a bit in the support group that I ran in Seattle. So I feel like it's a topic that is important to cover. So you are in the right place if you fall into any of the broad spectrum around divorce, because finding love again will come up. So just to give you a little idea about who I am, my name is Sunny Joy McMillan. I am a recovering attorney and a practicing coach. I'm the author of the Amazon bestseller Unhitched, Unlock Your Courage and Clarity to Unstick Your Bad Marriage. I also host the Sunny in Seattle radio show, and my work has been featured in Oprah Magazine and Best Self and booth.co.uk and some other places as well. But perhaps most importantly, as I've been saying throughout this series, is I also am a divorcee. And particularly important for today's episode, I found my greatest love after divorce. My ex-husband was an amazing man. He was a good man, and I have so much gratitude and appreciation for the time that we had together, even though it was high conflict and there were a lot of dysfunctional aspects to our marriage. I still appreciate what I learned from it, and I even more appreciate the post-divorce friendship that we had. All that said, though, I really did find my greatest love after divorce. So I know that it's possible, which is one of the reasons I like to share about this, so that it gives other people encouragement and hope in the midst of what can be a lot of fear. So what we're going to do today is spend about 20 minutes. I won't be taking questions, so we'll keep this nice and short. But if you do have questions and you want to take the work further, I will share how to do that at the end of the webinar. So 3 things that I want to touch on today in terms of finding love after divorce. The first one deals with grief. And it's interesting because sometimes, even if the marriage is not great, even if it's been unhappy for a long time, even if divorce has been the best thing for everyone involved, there is still some grief. I've heard clients talk about, even though there was a lot of tension in the household, a lot of resentment, a lot of fighting, there was still someone in the house when they came home. There was still that comfort in the routine. And so know that grief is a part of it, and to allow yourself to grieve, even if it wasn't the best marriage in the world, allow yourself to grieve what was and the hopes that you had for what could have been, the hopes for what you had perhaps when you walked down the aisle all those many years ago. And when it comes to grief, you probably heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's the stages of grief that folks go through, and this I think came out in like the 1960s or 70s. And I just want to point out that there are some more recent models for dealing with grief, because while Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's it stands the test of time, I think it's important to point out that she worked with patients who were dying and knew that death was imminent. And so this was what she witnessed when someone was coming to the end of a life, the stages of denial and anger and acceptance and all of those. And so while those can apply, there are some other models or ways that people are looking at grief that may be perhaps even more applicable in the situation of the end of a marriage, which is very different than the end of a life. I mean, there's some similarities, but you're just dealing with a different animal. And so the most important thing that I wanted to point out is that in the research that I've seen, that people who find meaning in the midst of a terrible circumstance are the ones who are able to recover and move on easier than those who can't. And so, for example, let's say that the marriage hasn't been great, but you had two beautiful kids out of it. Let's say it wasn't the perfect marriage, but you learned a lot about yourself, your ability to stand on your own 2 feet. There are so many things that can come out of a marriage, even if it doesn't last forever. And so finding meaning in that. And the other thing I want to mention around grief, so there is an exercise or a tool that we use in my coaching tradition, and it's called the 4 squares of change. And I bring this up because it provides a little bit of a roadmap for what you may be going through as you leave a marriage and enter into the next chapter, which will, in many cases, involve finding love again. So I just mention this so that you can see kind of where you are in the spectrum and just know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, even if you're in the worst part of it. So what usually happens when a human experiences a change in identity, and going from married to single is one of those changes. It changes the very nature of who you are, how you perceive yourself, how others perceive you. It's an ego shift or an identity change of some sort. And it really throws you into what we call these 4 squares of change that are linear, although, they're not, there's not like a super clear boundary between each stage. You can have 1 foot in one and 1 foot in another. So the first stage of this is basically a meltdown of sorts. And it's kind of like when a caterpillar goes into a chrysalis to become a butterfly. You may not have known this before, but the caterpillar actually breaks down into goo. Like, it doesn't just sprout little wings and come out of the chrysalis with an easy transition. It breaks down into like a soup of cells. It's a little caterpillar soup that has to reformat into a whole new organism. And that's probably how you will feel when you come out of a marriage. And the mantra here is, I don't know what the hell is going on, and that's okay. It is a death and a rebirth in square one. So after you have been in square one for a while, and really your only job there is to grieve the clean pain, the grief that is inherent in a loss, and to disbelieve the dirty pain. And by dirty pain, I mean all of those fearful, painful thoughts that come along behind it, one of which may be, I will never find love again. We dealt a lot with mind management earlier in the webinar short series, so I just invite you to check out the previous episodes on how to manage your mind during this time. But basically, when you're in square one, when you are person soup, as it were, kind of like caterpillar soup, just know that your only job really is to stay as gentle and kind with yourself as you can, so that you can become the butterfly and be ready for your next chapter. So grieve what is clean, what is inherent in this process, and then disbelieve all the dirty crap, the stuff that can happen in your mind that is not really reflective of the truth. The fearful thoughts like, I won't be able to keep my house, and I'll never find love again, and my ex is out to get me, or whatever those dirty pain thoughts are. Just allow yourself to disbelieve them. Okay, so once you have gotten through square one, that death and rebirth, this is where it starts to get good. And the next stage in square two is dreaming and scheming. And this is where you are actually feeling good enough again, where you envision, maybe I want to start dating. This is kind of what I think about when I want a partner. I know what I don't want, perhaps, from the marriage. Here's what I do want. And so you start thinking about what your life could look like, brainstorming, visioning, all of those things. And the mantra here is, there are no rules, and that's okay. Meaning, let your mind go, let your imagination wander. Just envision, how good could it get? And that's kind of setting yourself up for the next phase. Because once you've envisioned what you want, in square three, it's time to bring those dreams and schemes down into physical reality. And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is the hero's journey, because it's often 2 steps forward and 1 step back. You know, you get on the dating platform and you have a few missteps, but you make some friends, or, you go out on several horrible dates, and then you meet someone that becomes a friend, or even someone that becomes a romantic interest. So this is where you're actually getting back out into the world. And the mantra here is that it's harder than I thought it would be, and that's okay. decay. That is inherent in the process when you're in square three. This is basically, the analogy would go, when the butterfly is breaking its way out of the chrysalis. If you've ever watched this on a nature video, the caterpillar makes a little bit of headway, gets a little tiny hole in that chrysalis and tries to crawl out and has to rest. Breathe deep, rest, sit there for a while, make a little bit more headway, get a little farther out of the chrysalis. It's a very slow going, labor intensive process. And if you try to help it as a human, you try to think, oh, okay, I'll break open the chrysalis, I'll spread its little crumpled wet wings. The caterpillar or the butterfly will die. And so this inherent struggle in stage three is what really forges the new organism. It is what makes you strong in the broken places. This is where you really get to see what you're made of. And then square four, we call that the promised land. It's where everything is working well. Perhaps you found the new relationship and you're just tweaking for efficiency at this point. You're just ironing out small kinks and really growing. And it's ideal if you get to just stay in square four, never get kicked back into square one about anything in your life. But, chances are you're human, something else will happen. You'll have a child, you'll go bankrupt, you'll win the lottery, you'll change states, any of these kind of changes that really change the very fiber of your identity and who you are can kick you back into square one. And so just know that's the roadmap. So you may think about finding love again when you're in square two and start dreaming and scheming, and you may get into the hero saga of the dating journey in square three. So just know that's a pretty predictable process that people go through as they're changing. Okay, so that's number one, those 4 squares of change and how to deal with your grief. The other thing, this is where it gets pretty personal for me. This is what I call ditching the list. When you are going about finding love again, especially if you've been in a more the spiritual community or law of attraction, if you follow Abraham Hicks, if you've read The Secret, those kind of things. I absolutely believe the law of attraction is a universal law, just like gravity. It's just one of those things that's working, just like, certain protons and electrons are attracted to each other, like attracts like. And so, I believe that this is working, whether or not you're conscious about it. But what I will say is I also believe that there's a greater part of us. Some people call it your spirit, your soul, a higher self, just your inner wisdom, whatever you want to call it, that really has your best interest at heart and is out ahead of you in a way that your small, fearful, limited human self cannot be. The one that's limited by your mind and all of the stuff that's going on in there that's, somewhat limited by the body and any constraints you have there. And so I'll just share what happened in my life in hopes that it may help you in yours. So many, many moons ago, before I ever married my then husband, when I was dating toward marriage, I had a list of requisite qualities that I wanted in a person. And it was anything from, hair color to their level of education to what really their values and what drove them towards success and wealth. And looking back on it, I call it a pretty cringeworthy list because it was pretty superficial. And now I would have language for it that said, that was my small human self, the social self part of me, the part that was worried about impressing others and not disappointing others and fitting in and what I should be, what will be acceptable to my community, my peers. So I created this list. And it really was from my social self, my small self. And I got that in spades. It was kind of like winning the small self lottery when I married my then husband, because he fit all of that criteria and some more. And yet, my marriage was not a very happy one. We had happy moments, as I think most people do at some point. But overall, it was a very difficult marriage. It was a hard marriage. It was exhausting, and there was a lot of conflict. And so when I started going through divorce, I basically gave up the reins. My type A super planner, white knuckle death grip about what I wanted my life to look like, I just let it go because clearly that had not worked very well to that point. I was an unhappy attorney. I was unhappily married. I wanted to live somewhere else in the country. Like there were so many things that just didn't feel like a right life. And so I let it go because whatever I had been doing, meddling in, hadn't worked out so well. So what I instead started doing was just meditating on, praying for, just thinking about peace. Like all I wanted was peace because my life was pretty chaotic at that point. There had not been a lot of peace. And what ended up happening was my current partner, Chase, came into my life. I mean, literally delivered from Seattle to Austin in the most serendipitous, strange of ways. Just there were so many things that there was no way that I could have orchestrated it, that either one of us could have orchestrated it. And yet he was basically delivered to me in the most beautiful way. And he had none of the qualities that had been on my little superficial list, my small self list. But what he did have was far more than anything that I would have known to ask for. Most importantly, at the time, he just emanates peace, and that was what I needed. And as we got to know each other more, I realized that he has so many incredible qualities. Again, none of which were on that list that I had created. And it was somehow as if the greater part of me, I call it a soul, the greater part of me knew exactly what I needed. And with my small self out of the way, it was able to bring me even more than what I ever could have identified that I needed or wanted. It knew what my true needs were. And that is how he came into my life. So I call this ditching the list. And so you'll hear a lot from people around the law of attraction, or even people who are talking about finding a soulmate. Make a list of exactly what you want. I mean, I've seen some lists like this that look a lot like mine, and they are so, so specific. But what I have found is that many times those lists are made from the small human self, not from the greater part of you that has the bigger picture at heart, that knows what your true needs are. So I would just invite you to ditch the list and instead identify feeling states that you want to have in your new life with the new love interest. For me, that was peace, and that's how Chase came to me. But it could be joy, it could be fun, it could be feeling carefree, and any number of things. Identify the feeling states, and that leaves a lot of wiggle room for the universe, for your higher self, for something else out there to deliver to you what you really need that may be even greater than anything you could ever have imagined in your small human mind. And so that was my experience. So that's why I invite you to do the same. And it also takes a lot of the pressure off, because if you're only looking for one specific thing, it can get a little bit grippy about wanting it to have to be exactly that certain way. So if you leave a little bit of wiggle room, leaves you a little bit of room to breathe and for something even better than you could have imagined to be delivered to you. So finally, the last thing that I will say around this is opening up. I work with a lot of people who have been burned pretty bad or have experienced great heartbreak and the ending of a marriage, or in the marriage not working as they wanted it to. So there can be a tendency to close up shop and just think that it will be safer that way. But I will share a quote from one of my favorite mentors, Martha Beck, who I've mentioned many times. And this had nothing to do with love, finding love, the way this quote came about. It had to do with sharing a part of her story about leaving the religion of her youth to find her true faith. Ultimately, in a relationship with the higher power of her understanding, she had to leave her religion to do that, basically. And so it felt like a very tender story to share. But this was shared with her, and she has shared it with us as her students. And I agree with it wholeheartedly, that you will never be as hurt by opening up as you will be hurt by remaining closed. So there are ways to open up to finding love again that may be safer. Martha had a lot of trauma in her childhood years, so she didn't have a lot of experience in finding healthy, nourishing, functional relationships. So she had a lot of fear. It was a very unknown area for her. And so in learning how to build both friendships and romantic relationships, she had to use some pretty basic tools that most people might have learned a little bit earlier on in their life had they not experienced so much trauma. So she uses something that she calls, and I don't think she invented it, I think a therapist shared this with her many years ago, but she calls it the step check method. And if you picture the people in your life kind of being in spheres coming down into an inner circle, kind of like a bullseye, with the bullseye center being the very most intimate, close relationships you have. They may be familial or they may not be. I don't always think our biological family are the closest relationships we have. So don't let that define what we're talking about. But basically, bullseye center are the most intimate relationships, the people that you've allowed closest to your heart. And then they go out, in concentric circles from there. So start with someone way out in like the farthest circles, and you reveal something small to them, something that's a little vulnerable, but it's not going to be devastating if they don't hold it with care. So give them this small piece of information, take a step with them, and then check them. See how they use this information or intimacy that you shared with them. Do they hold it gingerly and dearly and cherish you, or do they do something that burns you? So if they hold it, and cherish you and you feel they're trustworthy, then take another step with them and check it. And then take another step and check it until slowly you bring them down into the bullseye center. So if you are feeling hesitant about letting people in, just use that step check method. But know that ultimately that opening up is going to allow you the greatest potential for new chapters in your life if you are desiring of finding someone new, which most of my clients are at some point, even, if it takes a little while to heal. And on that note on healing, I don't think that there are any hard statistics about this because it's a kind of hard thing to quantify, but the numbers that I hear floating around are, after a divorce, it can take, at least 6 months to a year to feel like you're healed and ready to get back out there. But with a pretty bad divorce, it can take up to 5 years and perhaps even more. There is no number on what is allowable in terms of your period of grief, like the number of months or years. Grief is over when it's over, and it may never be fully. I can only speak from my experience, and there are still losses in my life that years later, they don't have the charge that they once had, but there's still a little pang in your heart that you feel when you think about this person or this thing. And so just allow yourself as much time as it takes, even if you've got people in your ear saying, well, aren't you over that divorce yet? Aren't you past that? Aren't you ready? You write the rules on your grief. And as long as you're not getting stuck in it and story fondling, just going back over the same things over and over and over again, kind of in a hamster wheel, as opposed to getting out on the open road. So as long as you're not doing that, your grief will take as long as it takes, and that is okay, whatever amount that is. So finally, pitfalls I see are not giving yourself enough time to grieve, not allowing those 4 squares of change, not really processing the grief and, going through it in a nice way, just trying to sweep it under the rug and get past it. Because then you drag with you whatever you haven't processed. When did I hear last week that you can send all this stuff down into the basement, the feelings that you haven't processed and the pain you don't want to deal with, but while it's down in the basement, it's doing push-ups, like it's lifting weights. So just know, deal with it and then move forward. And then also on the flip side of that, allow yourself to open up again. Because as Martha said, and as I could not agree with more, that you will be far more hurt by remaining closed than you would be by opening up to what is out there for you in a way that feels safe for you. So that's what I've got for you. And this brings us to the end of week 15. We made it like all summer. With these webinar shorts, my Unhinged webinar short series. So thank you so much for joining me. So what I'm going to recommend going forward here is that if you want to take this work further, if you're seeing this later, I invite you to download a free copy of my book, Unhitched, where it goes into all of the things we've talked about for this 15 weeks and much more. So just go to unhitchedbook.com. That's unhitchedbook.com. And there you can download the book. And you can also find my contact information if you'd like to reach out. So thank you so much for joining me for these 15 weeks. And take care, everyone. Bye.